Tasha Kheiriddin is a principal at Navigator and a member of the Advisory Council for Center Ice Canadians. She's a friend of the show, and she joins us this morning. Hi, Tasha.
Good morning, Elias.
It's great to talk to you, Tasha. Unfortunately, it's for a story that is rather tragic. This is a tale about what happened to one principal in Toronto. He had a career as an educator. It spanned over 24 years, and it ended in suicide. Tasha, you were friends with Richard Bilkstow. Why don't you tell our listeners his story and what happened to Richard?
Sure. So Richard was, as you said, a principal with the Toronto District School Board, the TDSB, for 24 years. He was renowned, in fact. His retirement was full of accolades, and after that he did part-time teaching. So he had contracts, worked about maybe 7 months of the year. I met him on the set of The Agenda, which is a show here, a public affairs show, where both of us were talking about the failures of the TDSB, the failures to recognize merit in the admission system to specialized schools, something he cared very much about. These are schools that, kids have a great aptitude for math or for science or for arts. They have these magnet schools where kids can go and really pursue their dreams. And the province had changed the system of not the province, or the TDSB had changed the system of admissions to those schools to be a lottery. And so both of us thought this was incredibly unfair. And Richard was very concerned with fairness. In fact, he even founded the Toronto chapter of FAIR, which is the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. So we were on the show, and after that, we worked together on the changes to this lottery system, trying to get rid of it in the TDSB. And he then he approached me privately and said, I have this lawsuit. What had happened to him was, in 2021, he had undergone diversity, equity, inclusion training that was mandatory. And put yourself back in the time, right? This was the pandemic. Everyone was on home. It was on Zoom, 200 of his colleagues. And during the course of these sessions, 2 of them, he was basically berated for challenging the instructor about the issue of Canada being a more racist place than the United States. He said, no, it's actually not. It's not perfect. It is racist too, but I've worked in the U.S. and I've lived there and studied, and I know that it's not the same. Her response was, we're here to talk about anti-Black racism, but you and your whiteness think you can tell me what's really going on for Black people. But that was just the start of it. She then just pursued to get his colleagues to pile on to him and attack him as well. And in the second session, she revisited the entire episode as an example of someone supporting white supremacy. He was devastated by this. Like I said, this is a guy who's fought for fairness his whole life, and he went into a depression. He suffered mental anguish. He sued the school board. He took them to the WSIB, which is Workmen's Compensation, and he won. And they concluded he had been harassed and bullied on the job. They gave him compensation, but he wanted an apology from the school board because the school board didn't support him through this whole thing, Elias. They did not back him up. He complained to them, and they sided basically with the instructor. So in the course of this, he set this lawsuit, asking for an apology and compensation. Media started to get involved, and the stress in the end, as his family said, the distress of this entire thing came back to him, and it proved too much, and he took his life. It was something unexpected for everyone who knew him. We didn't realize how deep the pain was, and we've now called on the province to review what the TDSB is doing. We've called for the TDSB to change this policy, but there's so much else wrong with education here. You could have a laundry list. You could talk all day.
So what I just want to touch on this, Tasha, because, obviously this is a story out of Toronto, and sometimes we see what's happening in Ontario, and we've heard other stories about these types of training sessions that are happening in Ontario. Some of it for us in Quebec, because in Quebec, Quebec's a different type of province, right? Especially with its French face. And this type of training isn't necessarily happening at the same level in this province as it is happening, or what it seems like it's happening in Ontario. So what happened at the TDSB, this Toronto School Board, is that something that's happening? Are there similar stories across the province? Is this a bigger story than just this one case?
Yes. Well, it's not just the province. It's across the country. You're seeing an increased emphasis on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And to, there's nothing wrong with inclusion. In fact, the problem is here, it doesn't include people. It's divisive. This type of training, this type of splitting people up into racial groups, in the end of the day, is divisive. It doesn't help these kids who are suffering, under socioeconomic pressures or racism, graduate in any higher numbers. It doesn't help anyone get a better education. It makes the school board feel good they're doing this, but the agenda is not compatible with advancing the kids. And this is the problem, is that there's only so much space in the day. And when you're teaching your principals, first of all, if you're berating them like this, you're doing absolutely nothing. But if you're taking all the space and time to talk about this stuff, as opposed to realizing kids are falling behind in the basics, we have incredible levels of violence in the school. For all the equity and inclusion stuff we're doing, violence is getting worse. Interpersonal relationships across the country, from British Columbia to Ontario to Nova Scotia, is getting worse. So it's obviously not working. It's actually doing the opposite. It's making people so conscious of their race and their group that they're not getting together, and they're not seeing each other as allies in the fight for better education. It's more like my group versus yours.
Do we have, what you just said there, does it go on the anecdotal, or do we have some data? Now, and I know from the corporate world, because this is also happening in the corporate world across North America, and there is now some data that is saying it's not working, and some corporations are dialing it back. Do we have any similar data when it comes to education?
Well, I mean, look at what's happening in schools, and you will see on the violence piece alone. Because this is supposed to give kids a more equitable framework in which to learn. So it's basically to help people also, see themselves to get along and to increase make things easier for children so they don't feel excluded and all this stuff. But what's happening in schools? You're seeing increases in violence. In Nova Scotia, for example, 87% of teachers say that school violence has increased in the last year. You're seeing the same thing, about 90% of them who say the same thing in Ontario. And we've had the most violent year on record in our schools here since we collected data in 2000. Decolonization of schools in BC, I don't even know what that means, but they're decolonizing schools in BC. And in BC, 9 in 10 teachers report experiencing violence or bullying on the job. So for all the attempt to make things smoother for kids to feel like this is their school and their education is for them, it's clearly not working, because it's not combating the very thing that is the root problem that, people are not being able to learn because they're in a violent environment. So, I don't think they have statistics specifically on whether people feel less racist or less prejudiced. I haven't seen statistics like that. But if the goal is to create harmony in a place of learning, it is not working.
Tasha, to get back to Richard and his story, do you think his suicide, his death, will finally get people who are in charge of these educational systems and school boards to rethink how they've been approaching, a topic like race and a topic like, serious issues like diversity in schools? Do you think it will get them to change the way they do that?
Well, I hope so. I hate that it would come to this. It wouldn't. I mean, like I said, we were all in this group fighting for these issues before this happened. But yes, the province is now revisiting. The minister here has promised to investigate what happened here and how schools do diversity, equity training, and to make sure this never happens again. But really what we need to do is say, look, instead of taking the money and time and all the resources and effort that's being put into this, to DEI and this sort of stuff, redirect those funds to the kids who actually need help in school. Tutoring for low-income students who can't afford it. Rich kids can. Poor kids, when they fall off the rails, they don't get it. School, give it to them. Funding food programs for hungry kids so they can actually learn. Increasing phys ed in schools, so kids learn better. We know they do. And this is the issue. The focus should be on the children and learning. So I hope that, yes, our leaders and our educators and our government says enough of this. Let's focus on the things that really matter to children, that make a difference in their outcome, and not just making people feel good about, patting themselves on the back because they've got this training in their, checked off their box that they've done it.
Tasha Kheiriddin is a columnist at the National Post. She has her own Substack if you want to check out that as well. Tasha, thanks for your time. Thanks for shedding some light on this story out of Toronto.
Thank you, Elias.